Good morning and welcome to the 2022 LEP Institute. My name is Kavita and I am a training specialist and the LEP coordinator in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Before we get started, I would like to say a very special thank you to everyone that has made the last year possible for our scholars. Thank you to our presenters and a big thank you to our mentors for the 2021-2022 LEP year. Our LEP scholars started their journey in August of 2021, unsure of what their year in LEP would look like, but they each took it with stride. While each scholar brings something different professionally to UCF, they all bring determination and grit in the work they do, and they are all proud UCF Knights. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the dedicated, hardworking group of professionals who made up the 2021-2022 LEP cohort. Brian Strickland is a product owner for UCF IT. Hi, Brian.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I hope you enjoy the day.
Dr. Delia Garcia is the Director of Academic Advising in the College of Arts and Humanities. Hi, Delia.
Hi, Kavita. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Elijah Mazel is an application system analyst for UCF Housing and Residence Life. Hi, Eli.
Hi, Kavita. Good morning, everyone.
James Mangan is a commander with the UCF Police Department. Hi, James.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Jennifer Wolf is the Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations for the UCF Foundations. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello, good morning. Thanks for being here with us.
And I know I'm going to mess it up. I have tried over and over again, but Joshua Sigfried is the Associate Director of Student Success and High Impact Programs with College of Business. Hi, Joshua, and I'm so sorry.
Hi, Kavita. That's okay. I knew it had to be me when you said that, but welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Christina Shavers is an Assistant Director with the Office of Student Financial Assistant.
Good morning.
Hi, Christina.
Financial aid too. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lavira Henderson is an administrative coordinator with the School of Public Administration. Hi, Lavira.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Dr. Matt Adams is the Assistant Director of the Student Union. Hi, Matt.
Morning, everyone.
Michael Alderondo Jeffries is the Director of Academic Advancement Programs in the Division of Student Learning and Academic Success. Hi, Michael.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Nelson Roman II is an IT project manager with the College of Medicine IT.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Padmini Kupama-Waldron is the Director of Honors Research in the Burnett Honors College. Good morning.
Good morning, Kavita and everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Stephanie Campbell is a Multicultural Student Center Coordinator in Social Justice and Advocacy. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Stephanie Spies is the Wellness Education Program Manager in Wellness and Health Promotion Services. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Vanessa Gonzalez is an academic advisor at the Rosen College of Hospitality Management.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for attending the Institute.
And last, but certainly not least, is your host for the rest of this morning's program, Joshua J.J. Johnson, is the Assistant Director for the Veterans Academic Resource Center. Good morning, JJ.
Good morning, Kavita.
And I will hand it off to you.
Oh, thank you. And good morning to everyone on behalf of the 21-22 LEP cohort. Thank you for attending the Leadership Enhancement Program for the 2022 Institute. We hope today you engage and feel inspired to continue your journey to excellence. We hope you enjoy the speakers and the sessions we have lined up for you. To get started with the Institute, President Cartwright has recorded a brief university welcome due to another engagement.
Welcome to our annual Leadership Institute, organized this year by our class of 2021-22 Leadership Empowerment Program Scholars. I am honored to be a part of this incredible event and to work alongside each of you who are committed to your own personal development and to helping to move our institution forward. There is no doubt in my mind that we have exceptional people here. We are building an environment that will best empower everyone on our campuses to achieve their goals. I am very grateful for opportunities like the Leadership Empowerment Program and this Leadership Institute that its scholars put together each year that allow faculty and staff to network, exchange ideas, and grow stronger together. These programs give individuals the ability to invest in themselves and in their professional development. Our people are our greatest asset, and I look forward to continuing to provide opportunities like LEP that advance our people because we know our individual successes contribute to our collective achievements. As we have learned over the past few years, there's no limit to what we can accomplish when we care for one another and we remain committed to working together to find solutions that benefit us all. Let us congratulate our LEP scholars who today become LEP alumni and will continue to improve our UCF community with their passion and leadership. Go Knights, charge on.
So we thank Dr. President Cartwright for his brief university welcome, acknowledgement, and congratulations to the 2021-22 cohort. We are sorry you were unable to join us today. Next up, we have Dr. Andrea Guzman, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, will provide brief remarks on behalf of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Andrea Guzman joined the UCF as Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in July of 2021, where she serves as a member of the executive leadership team and is responsible for leading the development of a comprehensive strategy that champions evidence-based practices in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a multi-campus university. Before this, she served as Associate Vice President for Student Outreach and Diversity at Florida Atlantic University, FAU, in 2014. In this role, she led efforts to provide a campus climate that supports diversity and inclusion, student success, personal development, and integrated student learning experiences. While at FAU, she developed 3 university-wide centers, including the Center for Inclusion, Diversity, Education, and Advocacy. Within each center, she developed several student success programs for marginalized student populations and a number of symposiums to advance and sustain diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for faculty, staff, and students. During her 8 months at UCF, she has already made a lasting impact at the university, which is very true. Most recently, she has helped secure a philanthropic gift to create the Ginsberg Center for Inclusion and Community Engagement at UCF. The new center will serve UCF students, faculty and staff, and members of the greater Orlando community, providing education aimed at building cross-cultural and global competencies, as well as opportunities to learn about and effectively serve various populations, such as those with differing abilities and disabilities, veterans, and those who are first in their families to attend college, and people of varied social economic statuses, cultures, and beliefs. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Guzman.
Good morning. Thank you, JJ. I think that introduction is probably longer than my comments today. I appreciate your kind words. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella. On behalf of our Board of Trustees, our President, Alex Cartwright, and the entire executive team, I would like to welcome each of you this morning to the Leadership Enhancement Program, or the LEP Institute. LEP provides opportunities for selected faculty and staff to gain career-enhancing skills and experiences in today's changing educational environment, with a focus on professional and personal development and cultural competencies. In addition, graduates of the program are eligible for a one-time waiver of search for a position at UCF. So if you're creating a new position or you need to backfill an existing one, please consider an LEP graduate. The LEP Institute is led by LEP participants and is comprised of their LEP projects. Each involve careful consideration and hours of research and compilation of data. As such, I'd like to congratulate each of you on completing your projects and recognize those who helped organize this year's Institute. I would also like to recognize past LEP graduates, many of whom used their projects to make meaningful changes within their department or at our institution. So thank you. This year's theme, Journey to Excellence, is significant because UCF is at a pivotal time in our history. We are moving closer and closer to SET and Workday implementation. We're in the midst of developing a new strategic plan, and if you haven't seen it, the draft is available online. And we have begun to create necessary infrastructure to support diversity, equity, and inclusion by making excellence inclusive across the institution and to the region that we serve. We're well on our way on this journey to excellence. For some, the journey to excellence can feel like 3 steps forward and 1 step backwards at times, particularly when we think about our hope and goals for inclusive excellence and the recent bills that impact the work we do. So I thought it would be fitting to offer some encouragement. I'd like to start by reminding folks that censorship in the United States is not a new phenomenon. In fact, we've censored books and speech and educational materials as far back as we can go in history. We've censored who can and who cannot have access to certain materials. But history has also shown us that just as laws are created, they can be overturned. New laws can be introduced, and we always find ways to support one another while we continue to serve all of our constituents. One way I continue to ensure that I can remain relevant and authentic to the work that I'm entrusted to do is through equity-focused leadership. You've heard I've been at UCF for about 9 months now. And for those who don't know about where I came from, I spent 7 years as an associate vice president at FAU. And I also spent 12 years in community college leadership, where I last served as chief academic officer and provost of health services. There, I helped create restorative justice programs for individuals who had been sentenced as minors and served 20 or plus years in prison. And I helped establish practicum and clinical placements for students of color, closing the gap in allied health and fields and allied health professions for students of color. Prior to this, I worked in the nonprofit sector and developed academic support programs for at-risk youth in Detroit public schools. Every facet of my work has involved equity-focused leadership in supervising and managing different teams for my constituents, whether they be students, leadership, community partners, board members, etc. When I think of equity-focused leadership, I think of being a change agent, understanding that treating everyone the same or equally does not yield equity. To attain equity, you have to recognize that people are your most valuable assets and that they're all different and therefore have different levels of resources, support, and accommodation needs in order to thrive and succeed. They have to be a well-informed leader. You have to be empathetic and compassionate. And you have to have a tempered yet authentic radical attitude. So what does it look like in action? What does it feel like? The best way for me to explain it is by sharing what I believe effective equity-focused leaders are. And then I'll open it up for any questions that you might have prior to the presentation starting. Equity-focused leaders exhibit emotional intelligence, or a fancy way of saying they have tough skin. They think before they communicate, verbally or in writing. They manage personal sentiments so that decision-making isn't negatively impacted. They clearly understand their own personal biases and trigger points. And they understand that every action has a reaction, and that the reaction can be favorable or unfavorable. Equity-focused leaders challenge the system or status quo by asking tough yet intelligent questions. This means that they do their homework and they stay abreast of trends that impact historically marginalized populations so that they're able to speak about them without solely relying on anecdotes. They use data to demonstrate inequities, national data, regional data, data related to their constituents. They anticipate pushback and are prepared with alternative explanations or solutions. And they know which battles to pick and which ones to let go. Equity-focused leaders, the most successful ones are the ones that effectively climb the ranks in leadership, not only demonstrate and call out inequities, but they're seen as problem solvers first. They come to the table with recommendations on how to address identified issues. They have bold, out-of-the-box ideas. They can garner support by demonstrating varying levels of return on investment. They consider and navigate internal and external politics, and they carefully calculate their risk, and they own those risks. Lastly, equity-focused leaders lead by example. They create inclusive environments for their teams and in the spaces that they occupy. They recognize that they don't know everything and rely on and trust the varied expertise of others. They share the spotlight with those who demonstrate potential, but may not always be given opportunities. They consider who's missing and who's impacted when making decisions. They align funding and share funding to support equity initiatives. They make ethical decisions and hold themselves to high professional standards. They are passionate, authentic, and genuine. So as you listen to each of the projects today and think about your roles at the university, I encourage you to think about how you too can embody and adopt an equity-focused leadership style so that we can collectively continue to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion at our institution and simultaneously best serve all of our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guzman. As mentioned earlier, we will be able to take a few questions while we wait for our next, for our keynote speaker. So if there are any questions or that you would like to ask Dr. Guzman, feel free to do so now. In the Q&A, sorry, I forgot to add that in there, my bad.
JJ, it looks like everyone is still sleeping today.
I know, and I'm wired on coffee, so that probably balances everything else. We do, Vanessa said that she has a question. So
Yes,
Vanessa?
Thank you, Dr. Guzman. What would you say is one moment when you look back on your own journey to excellence in your professional career? What would you say is one moment that really stood out to you that really helped you to propel you on that journey to excellence?
That's a great question, Vanessa. I think I've had different moments in my career trajectory where I was sort of taken aback. I think one of my earliest recollections is I was helping with faculty selection. And so I was at the community college and faculty selection was done manually. And if you're familiar with how faculty pick their classes, it's based on seniority and union status. And there's all these things that have to be considered. And so that particular day, the system had gone down. And so we couldn't key in the faculty selection. And so we had to like write them on these spreadsheets and then run to the next room and make sure that nobody else picked the same class. And I was exhausted by the end of the day, and I was about to leave. I had finished the discipline that I had been assigned. And at the time I was an associate dean. And as I was leaving out, I saw the president of that particular campus, and she looked exhausted. You could tell that she was in a very bad mood. And I happened to know that she was diabetic. And so I left and I went and picked up something for her to eat, and I came back. And everyone used to be really afraid of her because she just has this very strong personality. And so I gave her the food and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "You have to eat. You're being mean to everybody. It's hot in here and people want to get out of here. So I'm going to take the next discipline from you so that all of us can leave." Well, fast forward about a year later, when they decided to open the largest campus at the institution, she was named president and was picking her team. And she picked me to be the chief academic officer, which made me the youngest in the system. I think what it taught me was that many times people remember who you are based on how you treat others. And that has always sort of guided everything that I do. And so I try to make sure that I slow down enough to see when somebody needs help or when somebody is struggling. And that is a great example of how just taking the time out. I could have gone home. I had 2 kids at home waiting for me. I had a husband at the time at home waiting for me. I could have left, but I didn't. And I didn't see the fruit of that right away. It came a year and a half later, but it really opened up new opportunities for me and changed the trajectory of my career.
Just to let everyone know, we're actually running a little ahead schedule. But we will, it looks like we have a couple of more questions here in the Q&A. First question that came up there, Dr. Guzman, is when do you hope to start offering positions within the Ginsberg Center?
Yep. So we are currently working on budget allocations for those because, as you know, we have to have a slow rollout, and we're working on those position descriptions. I'm hoping to be able to offer those in June, latest in July when we do the unofficial opening of the center.
Which will be very exciting. This is very exciting news with the new Ginsberg Center coming around the corner there. Another question that we have is, what has been your biggest surprise coming to UCF?
I've had lots of surprises in the 9 months that I've been here. I think my biggest pleasant surprise is to see just how committed staff and faculty are, and even our student leaders. I haven't experienced pushback. I've experienced just people being cautious and wondering, like, how are we going to navigate certain waters? But I think I've been very pleasantly surprised that I haven't felt pushback from any of the colleges. And, sometimes this level of position can create some anxiety in certain areas because it challenges the way that you've been doing things and really forces folks to reconsider normative practices in order to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think one of my other biggest surprises, just to be transparent, was the lack of infrastructure and resources that our institution has, because we're such a large institution that I thought to myself, oh, UCF, they're so big, they have so many students, there must be tons of money for me to do this work. And then when I saw the budget, I remember they set up a home meeting for it. Kavita was there and they put it up on the screen and they said, are there any questions? And I said, nope, it's pretty evident that we have no money. So that surprised me as well. So good surprises, some not so great surprises, but it put everything into focus, and it helped me understand how I needed to prioritize in order to move us to the next level.
That's the way it is with the large university. We're always having surprises around the corner. We have a couple more questions. There's one in the chat that says, what is your advice to some of us who are actively pursuing career advancement, but have to deal with assumed biases because of your background? That's a good question.
That is a good question, and that can be difficult. You know, I'm a big proponent of saying help change your own narrative. So perceptions are reality. And lots of people will say, oh, don't put a lot of thought into what others think about you. And, you know, yes and no. Don't let those thoughts negatively impact your career trajectory. Don't allow it to minimize your expertise. But at the same time, because perceptions are reality, you do have to know what other people think about you. My advice would be to begin to change that narrative. Look for opportunities so that people can see you in a different light. And so if the bias is that you're not an expert, look for opportunities to publish. It could be, you know, opinion pieces, it could be blog pieces, doesn't matter. Look for any opportunity to publish, look for opportunities to push out nuggets of your expertise on social media, look for opportunities to join committees where people that have hiring authority will be sitting at, so that you can begin to change that narrative. And stay motivated. Again, you know, people remember how you make them feel. So don't get discouraged. I know it's hard at times. Try to always maintain that smile, that sort of tempered approach when you're dealing with situations that are uncomfortable. Come with more than one solution, because sometimes when people have a bias against you, they'll shoot down your first recommendation. So make sure you have more than just one recommendation to move forward. And I will tell you what I tell any professional and what I live by. If you've tried all of those things and they haven't bared fruit, consider who you're working for and make the smart decision to leave. You have to know when it's time for you to leave as well.
Thank you, Dr. Guzman, for that for that response there. It looks like we have one more question in the Q&A. Well, two more, and I think that'll be all the time that we have for question and answer. But the first question there is, you mentioned leaders using research-based practices to help foster equity in academia for marginalized groups. From educational research, best practices for learning can vary across disciplines. Thus, do you have specific recommendations, for leaders who are dealing with constituents from multiple domains?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because you know, most of our best practices were not developed for marginalized communities. Or, you know, I always say, just because we have, or certain institutions have diversity, doesn't make their diversity diverse. And so a good example would be like UTSA. Their Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community is very homogeneous in comparison to ours. And so it's almost hit and miss, because we don't have the right solutions for our constituents. I always say trying something that has worked for one group that has some similarities is better than shooting blanks or, you know, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. So try something. You know, if there are some similarities within the constituents that you're serving and a best practice, maybe it's not a perfect alignment, but you can talk to your constituents and see what is it that they need. I'll give you a great example. At FAU, we developed Reaching Individual Success and Empowerment. It's called RISE, for first-generation college students. It started off with 3 pillars. It now has 6 pillars, because as we continue to assess the program, the students would say, well, we need more help in career advisement. We need more help in financial literacy. And so we began to add elements to make that program responsive to the needs of the students that we were serving. One of the unique aspects was that the mentoring component, the traditional mentoring model that FAU had endorsed and spent so much money on, was not working for this group. They needed a more intrusive yet informal mentoring program. And so we had to develop our own mentoring program. And once we developed it for RISE, we took a look at other programs, the Kelly Stroll Emerging Scholars Program, and said, okay, what kind of mentoring program works for this group? What kind of mentoring program works for Futuro Success? What kind of program works for Urban Male Initiative? So it can't be a cookie cut approach. It's sort of looking at what has worked for groups that may be similar, but then assessing the needs of your constituents to make sure that it works for who you're serving. And hopefully, you know, I look at UCF as sort of this hub that can really, really stand out in terms of developing best practices that truly do work for diverse student populations because of our student demographics.
Yeah, I think that's pretty awesome there, that we have so much to offer here at UCF. And so finding those little nuggets, as you've mentioned, in terms of being that hub of best practices, I think are one of the many solutions that you mentioned in here. And it looks like we have one more question in here. It says, greeting, Dr. Guzman. Thank you for your time here today. What has been your motivation to keep pushing through the so many roadblocks that have been presented themselves to you? For example, you said you stayed on the board with us here at UCF, even though there was no budget. I don't speak Spanish, so I can't read.
Lots of vanilla coffee. The last sentence is, how do you maintain your energy? So lots of vanilla coffee helps. You know, I think about who we're serving, our students, right? I grew up in Detroit, where, you know, I went to Detroit public schools, where they don't give you a whole lot of hope of what life is going to look like. And so for me, it's every student's life that we touch has the capacity to change the trajectory for their own personal lives, but for the generations behind them. And, you know, people get upset sometimes. They're like, oh, we need a revolution. We got to like force people into loving each other. It's like, that's not going to happen. The way you do it is truly one person at a time, because that one person then impacts their children then impact their children. And that's how we end up in a better society than what we have today. So I really try to stay focused on our students, their stories, their successes. You know, even when I speak with faculty and staff, many of them will share, you know, I never thought that I'd be in this country. I never thought that I'd be a faculty member. I never thought that I would make it to this level in my life. And so that is very motivational to me. You know, human resources is your number one strength, always. You can do a whole lot with no money, but people who are truly committed and passionate about human rights and social justice. So for me, finding the money is the easy part. That's not the hard part, because the hard part is really getting people behind the mission and really supporting the goals towards diversity, equity, inclusion. That's the hard part. And that piece I found here at UCF. I wouldn't be at an institution where I did not believe that the leadership supported equity and inclusion work, and that I didn't think the constituents wanted that kind of change. And I get, you know, all kinds of emails all the time. We're looking for the next VP here. You know, prior to FAU, I interviewed at Purdue, and Purdue's a great institution, but I knew it wasn't a good fit for me. So that's how I stay motivated. Our students, our faculty, our staff, those success stories.
Thank you for that answer there. You're right in terms of it's all about serving our students and taking it one day at a time, one student at a time, because that's why we're here. If there were no students, there wouldn't be a reason for UCF here. So again, thank you, Dr. Guzman, for your welcoming remarks. The question and answer session was awesome. I took some notes. I hope others took some notes as well. And so thank you again for your remarks and getting us started on this awesome day of sharing and learning. I've already learned a lot from you from this brief moment today. So moving on to our keynote speaker, Dr. Richard Lapchak, who is the director of the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sports and the president of the Sports and Social Justice at the University of Central Florida. He is a human rights activist, pioneer, radical equality, internationally recognized expert on sports and social issues. Scholars and author Richard E. Lapchak is often described as the racial conscious of sports. Racial conscious of sports, that's awesome. He brought his commitment to equality and his belief that sports can be an effective instrument of positive social change to the University of Central Florida in August of 2001, where he launched the DeVos Sports Business Management Program. In 2015, it was named the number 2 program in the world by Sports Business International. Dr. Lapchak is a prolific writer. His 17th book was published in 2018. Lapchak is regular columnist for ESPN.com and the Sports Business Journal. He has spoken in the United States Congress, at the United Nations, and the European Parliament, and at the Vatican. Wow. A lot of stuff already there. He has given more than 3,000 speeches and written more than 600 articles. He was introduced into the Sports Hall of Fame of the Commonwealth Nations in the category humanitarian, along with Arthur Ashe and Nelson Mandela. Lapchak was inducted into the New York City Basketball Hall of Fame in 2015. He was named one of the Beyond Sports inspirational people, living and past, who used sports to change the world, along with Billie Jean King, Muhammad Ali, and Nelson Mandela. In the fall of 2021, Lapchak was named the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian of the Year and was given the Arthur Ashe Leadership Award and the Harbor House Champion of Equality. In March 2022, he was named the Central Floridian of the Year. He is being presented with the John Carlos and Tommy Smith Social Justice Champion Award next month, May 2022. Lapchak was named one of the 100 most powerful people in sports and has received 10 honorary degrees. Lapchak was one of 200 guests personally invited by Nelson Mandela to his inauguration after leading the American sports boycott of South Africa from 1975 until the apartheid. He has been married to Ann Pasnick since 1989, and they have a son, Joe, 2 daughters, Jamie and Emily. Richard and Ann have 4 granddaughters, Taylor, Emma, and Molly, and Lauren. Dr. Lapchak, there's a video that you wanted to present also?
Yes, I think they were going to show that before I spoke.
Okay. And so there we go with the video.
Richard grew up in a family where there was a strong tradition of doing the right thing. His father was an iconic figure. He signed Sweetwater Clifton to the Knicks, breaking the color barrier.
His recollections alone of being around his father growing up would fill a dinner table conversation with great tales, meeting Jackie Robinson when he was a kid, seeing what his father went through for fielding the first black player in Knick history.
Joe was someone who, as a coach, never let race get in the way of doing the right thing. And there's no question that that had a huge impact on Richard himself.
When I was 14, I was at a basketball camp with 5 other white guys. One of the white guys was hurling the N-word at the black guy day in and day out till I challenged him, and this guy had knocked me out cold. Well, the black guy was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, then Lou Alcindor, and a lifelong friendship grew out of that.
Everything Richard has fought for has not been popular at the time. And he has been this courageous light that has said, this needs to be said, this needs to be heard, and I'm going to say it.
There's a fine line sometimes between being courageous and putting your life on the line. With progress comes pain, and that was a price that he was willing to pay.
When I was the American leader of the sports boycott of South Africa, I was actually attacked in my office in a college library by 2 masked men and had the N-word carved in my stomach.
Richard had very bravely spoken out against apartheid. There were risks involved. There were just a lot of bigots who didn't like what he had to say.
He was attacked for standing up and wanting to right a wrong. And to be brutally attacked as he was, to have the N-word carved with scissors into his stomach, he had to have been frightened beyond words. And a lesser person would have said, okay, that's it, I'm done. Not Rich. They who did that, it's the wrong person.
I've been involved in civil rights for the last 28 years of my life, but I can never, ever, ever know what it's like to be Black. That's an instantaneous, every minute sentence that society has given to Black communities and Hispanic communities in this country, that discrimination can take place at any time.
My dad taught me that a leader is somebody who stands up for justice and doesn't block its path. I've spent most of my adult life trying to help young people who live in crises that have become more profound as the generations have gone on.
You know, he's really been in the forefront in the whole bridge between sports and using that to achieve equality, not only here in the United States, but around the world.
He's been involved in civil rights and race issues for his entire life.
I automatically smile when I think of Richard. Wow. I smile and also a tear comes to my eyes. Whew. He's a good man. I thank him. I'm appreciative of the work that he has done. Thank you. Thank you, Richard Lapchak. Thank you for being you, and thank you for wanting this world to be a better place, and because of you, it is.
Good morning, everybody. And Josh, thanks for the kind words you spoke in introducing me. I'm grateful to be here with this leadership enhancement program, because if there's any point in history that we really needed leaders, we need you today. With all of the crises going on globally and in the United States, leadership is such an important factor, and we've been blessed with some great leaders, and we've been blessed with some, or not blessed with some bad leaders that I'm sure you'll be talking about during the day. I was asked to talk about my journey, which I guess is the theme of today, and how I got to where I am. I never thought I'd be involved in the world of sport when I finished graduate school, but here I am some 50 years later, still involved. And I'm sure that maybe before you saw the video, many of you could be wondering, why is the 76-year-old white guy here talking about racism and sexism in particular? I hope the next 30 minutes will give you more of an inkling of why I do that. So I'm from the world of sport. It's a different world than it was 3 years ago. The pandemic obviously changed everything, not only in sport, but in society around the globe. I was proud of the role of sport in the United States. Some of you may remember that an NBA player tested positive early in March of 2020, and Adam Silver, the commissioner, shut the league down within 2 hours, and the rest of sport was shut down within the next 2 days. America was still wide open. There were no masks, there were no vaccines, nobody was talking about shutting down. It's estimated that if the administration had shut down America the way the NBA did, that more than 100,000 lives would have been saved. We saw the big-heartedness of sport right away. The day after the announcement that the NBA was shut down, a 19-year-old rookie who had never played a game in the NBA, Zion Williamson, announced he was donating $1 million of his salary to support the workers of the arena where the New Orleans Pelicans played. In the next 6 weeks, more than $130 million was donated by players, coaches, teams, and leagues. This is at a time that money was going away because nobody was attending. There was no sponsorship, yet sport kept giving out. And then all of a sudden, everything focused and shifted in American society and around the globe with the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. The issue of police brutality became a subject of society and also in the world of sports. where athletes started to express themselves more vocally than they had in the past. We should have known better. And the year before George Floyd was murdered, there were only 27 days in the United States when a police officer did not shoot and kill a citizen in their community. 27 days that did not happen. Now, obviously, most of them were in the line of duty, but too many of them were murders like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. We began to focus not only on police brutality, but on systemic racism and talk about it in depth for the first time in my lifetime. We talked about how it affects housing and education and healthcare and the financial institutions and the criminal justice system. We began to face this uncomfortable truth that America had racism deeply in its roots, tracing all the way back to 1619 with the introduction of slavery in the United States, still having an effect on Black and brown people today. The Me Too movement just a few years ago made America force itself to look at how sexist and misogynistic we still are. The renaming of the Washington football team during the race.
I think we just lost Dr. Lapchak. Let's give him a couple of minutes to see if he connects back up. Welcome back, Dr. Lapchak. Sorry that we lost you there. So whenever you're ready to start back up. It looks like you're still on mute.
Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry about that. So I was talking about uncomfortable truths and about the renaming of the Washington football team from its original name. And it showed us, I think, that it reminded us how America was actually founded on the genocide of so many of our indigenous people. We live in Orlando. For those of you who come from out of state and weren't here, it was when the Pulse nightclub shooting took place. It had an enormous impact on the community and forced us to see how homophobic we are in the United States. So those are just a few of the uncomfortable truths, but Kavita asked me to focus on my personal journey. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into that. So when I was 5 years old, I looked outside my bedroom window in Yonkers, New York, where I was raised, and I saw my father's image swinging from a tree with people under the tree picketing. And for several years after that, I'd pick up the extension phone in our house, my dad not knowing I was listening. And it was racial epithet after racial epithet being hurled at him. I didn't know what any of it meant as a 5, 6, and 7-year-old boy, but I knew a lot of people in the world hated my best friend, and I didn't understand why until several years later when I was old enough that he could explain it to me. As you saw in the video, he signed the first Black player in the history of the NBA, a league that's now 80% Black. But in 1950, there were a lot of Americans who didn't want to see any Black people playing in the NBA. So my dad was also a double inductee into the Basketball Hall of Fame as a player for the original Celtics and as the coach of both St. John's University and the New York Knicks. and everybody assumed I would follow in his footsteps. He was the first great big man in basketball. I was 6 feet tall in the 8th grade. I was one of the tallest players in New York City. And I was heavily recruited by New York City high schools, including the top basketball program in the country, which was called Power Memorial High School. I chose not to go there, but I became friends with the coach, and he invited me to go to the summer camp that was introduced in the video that you saw. So at that summer camp, there were 6 of his players and me, and there were 5 white players, one of whom's been a D1 basketball coach for the last 35 years. And the black player. And it was that guy who's been the coach for 35 years who was dropping the N-word on the black guy who you now know as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The friendship has been so profound that literally a week ago, my wife and I flew out to Los Angeles to help Kareem celebrate his 75th birthday. And we've had lots of things. He's spoken at commencement here. He taught Taco Fall his skyhook shot a couple of years ago, for those of you around when Taco was playing for us. But the important thing for me as a 15-year-old white kid was I suddenly had a young urban African-American lens with which to see what racism was doing to his community and other communities of color. And I decided as a 15-year-old that I was going to spend the rest of my life working in the area of civil rights. I didn't know what that meant as a 15-year-old, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation on how South Africa used sport as part of its foreign policy and the international response, and compared it to how the Nazis had done that in the 1930s. And it became published as a book in 1973. I started speaking about apartheid. I was teaching at a college in Virginia. And eventually in 1974, founded the Sports Boycott of South Africa. For those of you who are too young to remember, apartheid was the most racist system of government on the face of the earth in the second half of the 20th century. It's the only time in peacetime history that the entire global community came together to try to strangle a regime. There was an oil boycott, a trade boycott, a bank loan boycott, and a sports boycott. Well, you could smuggle in oil, you could smuggle in trade, you could smuggle in currency, but you couldn't play sports in the dark. And South Africa, like so many other countries, was a sports mad country. So the sports boycott became its Achilles heel. All of the European countries were boycotting South Africa in sport by the mid to late 1970s. So I knew the South African teams were coming. And sure enough, in 1978, their Davis Cup team was playing in the North American zone because nobody else would play against them. So the matches were scheduled to take place in Nashville on Vanderbilt's campus. And my job as the head of the coalition of groups that had come together to try to stop this was to go to Nashville and try to get the matches canceled. So that weekend, I spoke to audiences every day from Friday till Monday afternoon in churches, schools, wherever people could gather to try and influence them to join the boycott. I was working closely with the African governments who asked me to announce that they would boycott the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics if this team was allowed to come. So we had a press conference announcing that, and Dick Schaap, who's the father of Jeremy Schaap, who you saw in the video, came up to me and said that the financial backers of the Davis Cup had pulled out. It looked like the matches were going to be canceled. I announced that to the crowd. It was an anti-apartheid crowd. They went crazy. When I flew home to Virginia that night, I thought maybe for the first time in my life, I had done something worthwhile. The next night, I was working late in my college office, which was in the school's library. The library closed at 10:30. At 10:45, there was a knock on the door. I assumed it was campus security doing a routine check because they saw a light on after the building closed. But when I opened the door, instead, it was, as you heard in the video, 2 men wearing stocking masks who proceeded to cause liver damage, kidney damage, a hernia, concussion, and carved the N-word in my stomach with a pair of my office scissors. Josh, lying in the hospital bed that night, I knew that if people had gone to the length that they had gone to stop my dad 28 years before, and the length they had gone to that night to try to stop me, they must have thought that our using the sports platform to address issues of racism was having an effect they didn't want to see continue. So I determined that night that I was going to spend the rest of my life using that sports platform to address various social justice issues, including racism. But we've had programs on men's violence against women, on human trafficking, lots of social justice issues that have become so important in our society. So in 1978, I decided that it was not safe for my family to stay in Virginia. And this is why I don't usually tell this part of the story, but because of What's happened with the police in the last couple of years, I will share it with you this morning. So I was in the hospital 4 days, came home, about 25 friends and supporters had flown in from around the country and we're in our living room when a supporter from Nashville called and told me that the afternoon newspaper, the Nashville Banner, had run a page one editorial literally across the top of the page that said, Lapchak's wounds ruled self-inflicted, that I had done this to myself, in other words. One of the people in our living room that afternoon was a neighbor who was a lawyer. He said, we better go down and talk to the police. So we went the next day to meet the detective in charge of the investigation. He started the conversation by denying that they had leaked the story to the press, but obviously they had. It was, according to the Nashville Banner, an unnamed source in the Virginia police that told them that. And he said, listen, I believe the attack took place the way you said it did, but there are people on the force who don't. Why don't you take a lie detector to prove it happened the way you said it did? I said, I'm a student of the civil rights movement. I've been an activist in the civil rights movement for 10 years. I know how police have used lie detectors and polygraphs with civil rights activists, and I probably am not going to agree to do that, but I would consult that night with all of the leaders in the civil rights movement that were part of our coalition, and all the major ones were. And my friend, the attorney, said, what are you going to do with the information that you asked Lapchak to take a lie detector? I'm Lapchak, if you've forgotten. And he said, nobody will know until he says yes or no, then we'll have to make it public. Well, that seemed like a reasonable position for them to take as a naive person I was at that time. That night, I spoke to all of the leaders in the coalition, and they all, to a person, said absolutely refused to take this based on principle. And before I went to bed that night, I thought of women who had been sexually assaulted being asked to prove that they'd been sexually assaulted. As I'm sure many of you know, only one in 5 rapes are reported in America because women don't trust the process that the police will put them through. And I felt maybe for the first time I had some understanding what it must be like for a woman who had gone through that horror and been asked to prove that she had actually gone through it. So the next morning, a local reporter calls, said, I've been told you've been asked to take a lie detector. What are you going to do? Obviously, the police did leak that to the press. And I told them that I had spoken to the various civil rights leaders the night before, and they told me absolutely not to take it. And I also told them about those women who I had thought of that night before. He wrote both of those things in the story, but he also wrote when it came out on Monday morning that according to a local medical examiner, all of the wounds that Lapchak incurred were consistent with self-infliction. Now, the police had sent they told me it was their doctor. They didn't use the term medical examiner. He spent an hour with me in the hospital, never looked at 1 inch of my body. He happened to be from India and talked about how empathetic he was to the cause that I was supporting and being anti-racist. And again, never looked at 1 inch of my body. But in this statement that's now in the Monday morning Virginia papers, not only am I refusing to take a lie detector, but a doctor, a scientific authority, is saying that the wounds were consistent with self-infliction. Some of you may have read that all of the families who have lost a loved one as an incident of police brutality in the last 2 years to a person, every single one of those families has asked for a private medical examiner to examine the body of their loved one because they didn't trust the local medical examiner. When I was in Virginia, I didn't know that history of medical examiners. A study came out last year that 75% of medical examiners who were surveyed said they changed the results of what they thought had happened to the victim. And medical examiners, by the way, never examine a living patient, only a cadaver. That in 75% of the cases, they changed what they thought was the reason for the cause of death to conform with the police's version of it. And I knew that we needed to do something. Obviously, to get the focus back on South Africa, I flew back to Nashville to try to do that. And I realized nobody cared. It was, did Lapchak do it? Didn't Lapchak do it? So I flew to Washington, had a private FBI operative administer a lie detector, and flew to New York City and had a civil rights medical examiner examine me. And we released the results of both of those 2 tests, affirming that the attack had taken place exactly the way I said it did, at a press conference at the United Nations, which was very supportive of my work at that time. And I flew back to Virginia that night on the understanding that the rumors were that the police were going to arrest me upon arriving in Virginia. They obviously heard about the lie detector that I took and the civil rights medical examiner, and nobody was there to arrest me. But we knew that there was no way that we could stay in Virginia, and the United Nations offered me a position there. So in June of 1978, we moved to New York City, and I began working at the United Nations. In 1981, it was the next time a South African team was coming, so we formed another coalition to try to stop those matches. It was a rugby team on its way to play in New Zealand, and our coalition met at the Church Center for the United Nations, which was right across from the UN building, every Thursday night. So anybody who wanted to follow my movements would know where I was on Thursday night, because I was the chair of this coalition again. And on this particular night, I had purchased a used car from a colleague at the United Nations and drove it to our apartment on the Upper West Side. When we moved to New York in 1978, we bought a home in Woodstock, New York, which is about 2 hours out of New York in the Catskill Mountains, as a weekend summer getaway. And my family was spending the summer there, so I was going to drive in this car to be with them for the weekend. But when I got back to our apartment on the Upper West Side, my wife and 2 children were frantically running about the lobby because somebody had broken into our apartment in New York City. They didn't touch any of their things. They ransacked all of my things. The only thing they took was the manuscript of a book that I was writing about this particular period of time in my life. The New York City police advised my family to go back up to Woodstock for their safety. And the next day I went back to work at the United Nations, this time under heavy armed guard. At about 11 o'clock that morning, I got a call from my wife at the time saying, I'm okay. And I didn't know there's a chance she wouldn't be okay. Somebody had tampered with the engine of the car on the streets of New York the night before and going 65 miles an hour. Thank God in the middle of the morning when there wasn't much traffic on the throughway, she was able to wrestle it to the side of the road, bringing herself and the 2 children to safety. The police found 2 people under the hood of the car we were replacing midweek the next week and chased them into Central Park. And I tell you that part of the story because I knew that the people at the United Nations brought me to New York City to get me out of the South because they thought racism exists in the South, not in the North. But I knew, obviously, that racism exists in every nook and cranny of the country. We were able to get all the matches canceled in 1981, but the South Africans, to save face, decided that they were going to have a game in Albany, New York, which again is about 2 hours north of New York City. They thought that protesters would never go to Albany, but we were not going to let that happen. So we organized busloads of protesters to go up there. And I decided that I was going to stay in a hotel in Albany. So I made the reservation there. But at the last minute decided that I would stay in Woodstock with the 2 armed guards that were taking care of me. And we woke up the next morning to the news that a bomb had gone off outside of the hotel that we were supposed to be staying in. Obviously meant to send a signal to me that I should be afraid of what might be forthcoming. That was the end of our sports contacts with South Africa. I was asked by Nelson Mandela in 1991 and 1992 to bring a program that we'd started in the United States called Project Teamwork, which used sports to teach how to resolve conflicts peacefully and also to try to improve race relations. And I went to the NBA to try to get help on that journey. So went to David Stern, the commissioner, and Charlie Grant, the head of the Players Association, and they agreed to come on the first trip. And on the trip were Patrick Ewing, Dikembe Mutombo, and Alonzo Mourning, who are 3 all-pro players, all now inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, all taller than 7 feet, if you don't have a visual of them in your mind. And the coaches were Wes Unseld and Lenny Wilkins, also Hall of Fame basketball coaches. And when we arrived in South Africa, David Stern, the NBA commissioner, said, Richard, you're not going to like this, but when we go to a new country, the first thing we do is go to the US Embassy. And I think he said that to me because he thought that I thought that the US government was involved in the attack on me one way or another. And I did have that as a thought. But I said, David, I'm a team player. Obviously, I'll go with you to the embassy. So we get to the gates of the embassy, walk through the embassy. If you can envision me, a 6-foot kind of nondescript white guy with 3 towering NBA Hall of Famers, as well as 2 Hall of Fame coaches. I was the least distinguished looking of all of them, but the ambassador came right by all of them and came up to me and he said, I want you to know I was here in 1978 as deputy. And in 1978, half of the people here, and I want to remind you where the here was in 1978. I was in my government's embassy. He said, half of the people here wanted you killed, The other half considered you a hero. I was in the latter group. And he took me to the secure area of the embassy, which at the time I didn't know existed. Now I know every American embassy has it, where they keep classified documents that they can either protect as a result of an attack or destroy, depending on how the nature of the attack. And he pulled out a file folder with my name on it, and it was so thick he put a ruler next to it. It was 3.5 inches thick. And when I opened it, it was a documentation of my daily movement from 1968 through 1981, the last time a South African team came. And, I knew something like that probably existed, but to have it in my hands was a sobering moment, but it also showed the importance of what we were trying to do using that sports platform. So I've been using it both with the DeVos program and the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport and the Institute for Sport and Social Justice for all these years. And I've stayed in that world of sport because we have something that I think nobody else has. We call it the miracle of sport, and it's the huddle. So when you get in a huddle, for those of you who have played sports, or at least watch sports, and you know what the huddle is, before a game, everybody gets together for hopefully inspirational words from the coach. But when you get in that huddle, I can't think of any other place where it suddenly doesn't matter if you're African American or white or Latino or Asian American, Native American or Arab American, Protestant, Catholic, Buddhist, Sikh, Jew, Hindu or Muslim, young or old, gay or straight, come from a rich family or poor family. You can't win if you don't pull together as a team. I don't know any other place, again, where that exists, but imagine if we brought that into corporate America. Imagine if we brought it into faith-based America, institutions of higher education everywhere. We spend our days working for the rest of our lives. What a different world it would be. I have no doubt that we would address social justice issues in our country much more effectively if we adopted that huddle mentality, and also if we had more women and people of color in significant decision-making roles in all parts of our country. And that's what we work toward, both in the institutes that I've been in, as well as our program. The DeVos program is a graduate program in sport business management that brings our students in here who want to use the power of sport to affect positive social change. So it's something that I'm very proud of. I have, at age 76, announced that as a result of the racial reckoning, that I wanted to focus all of my activities on anti-racist activities. So I've stepped down as the chair of the DeVos program, but will continue to be the director of the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport. And I was blessed to be asked by the family of George Floyd to be on the board of the George Floyd Memorial Center, which is being built as we speak. And I was also asked to be the keynote speaker at the 2nd anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. So that's what I'm going to focus my activities on. I want to thank you for having me here this morning. I wish everybody in the audience that they use their leadership skills to affect positive social change, because we need you. We need you fighting for social justice, and I would encourage you to use your lives to do that. Thank you very much for listening this morning.
Wow. Thanks, Dr. Lapchak, for first being our morning keynote speaker and just sharing your passion, your commitment for equity and inclusion, and just how passionate you are to continue on your dedication to service and with sports and the diversity, equity, inclusion arena overall. And so just thank you. And on behalf of the cohort, thank you for your time to share with us today. As seeing in some of the chat comments, people just left and right saying how inspiring you are there. We do have some time for questions. So if you have some questions for Dr. Lapchak, you can put them in the question and answer section of the Zoom link, and we will go from there. So if there's any questions.
Josh, sometimes people don't exactly know what to say after they
Right, exactly. But we do have one starting off here. So please describe how, if at all, your faith upbringing informed your commitment to social justice and human dignity.
Was the question my faith upbringing, as in religious?
I believe so. I mean, it just says, how has your faith upbringing informed your commitment? So they didn't go into deeper detail there.
So
yes.
I was raised as a Catholic. I went to visit my sister and her husband in North Carolina in my junior year of college, and went to a Sunday Mass. And at that Mass, this would have been about probably early 1960s. All of the white people had communion at one point, and I was curious that no Black people went up to communion. And then as we were leaving the church, I saw all of the Black people who wanted communion to go up and get it separately. And that was the last time I went to church. I was very disgruntled with various popes that had served to lead the church. But in 1976, I was asked to go on a trip to China with a group of religious leaders. And on that trip were the heads of the social justice offices of all the different religious groups, including Black Muslims at the time. And I was so impressed by their commitment to social justice and what the churches were doing, various faith groups were doing, that I gradually became to come back. And when this Pope, Francis, became the Pope, it kind of sealed the deal for me. I was lucky enough to be asked, I think you said it in the introduction, by Pope Francis to speak at the Vatican on social justice issues at a conference he pulled together. So it's important for me today, but it has not always been important for me. But I feel good about the roles that various faith groups can play in social justice if they commit themselves to it.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question here. How did you stay passionate and convicted to doing the right thing when our society is oftentimes so against it and tears down people with your pure intentions?
So clearly, we could be overwhelmed by the social justice issues that exist in America today. When Barack Obama became president, there were 625 hate groups. When he left office, there were 1,100 hate groups. They increased even more during the presidency of Donald Trump. We're a violent society. 12 children under the age of 16 die of a handgun wound every day. 40% of urban American children drop out of school. 34% of girls under the age of 20 will have a baby before they leave their teenage years. We're the biggest consumers of drugs in the world. We have nearly 1 million victims of human trafficking in the United States. I could go on, but what makes me realize that it's possible to overcome all those things was a day that I spent in 1994 in South Africa. So I was invited by Nelson Mandela to be one of his guests at his inauguration. And as I stood there on the steps of the Union buildings in Pretoria and watched this man who had been the most hated person in his country by white people who controlled the country for so many generations, who had been a political prisoner for 27 years, suddenly become its president, I knew that anything and everything was possible. So whenever I get discouraged, whenever I see some of the things I've talked about here today and that I know people in the audience have witnessed or read about happening, and it seems so overwhelming, I go back to that day and know that if we really put our minds to these social justice issues, we can improve things, starting with electing more women and people of color in offices that are going to make the decision. So Washington and state capitals focus on those really important social justice issues instead of what we normally focus on.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. So the question being presented here says, can you share what current work of the Sports and Social Justice Institute does?
Thank you for that question and the opportunity to tell you that. So we publish something called racial and gender report cards on all the major professional sports and college sport and the sports media. And that analyzes the hiring practices by race and gender of every single professional position in those areas. We started in 1988 and continue to this day. And when we started, I think all of the professional leagues were aggravated that I was doing that. But now the commissioners all use it as a resource to try to get their teams to hire more women, people of color, because when we started, people were talking about diversity and inclusion being a moral imperative. Now they also realize it's a business imperative. So for them to be successful, they really have to implement that. We have one of the largest training programs in the country at the Institute for Sport and Social Justice on the issue of men's violence against women. We trained on over 200 college campuses. We've trained virtually every Major League Baseball and NBA team and Major League Soccer team. We've trained all 4 branches of the US military in gender violence prevention. And we also have the largest diversity and inclusion training program in the country there that's using athletes as the trainers and working primarily in the sports context, but they've essentially reached the same audiences with colleges and universities, professional sports teams, as well as all 4 branches of the military.
It looks like we're getting close to that time where we need to move on to our break and move to our agenda for the day. So again, thank you, Dr. Lapchak, for an awesome insight to your life, your story, and your commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and hopefully inspired some of us who are listening today to continue fighting the fight or pick up the mantle to fight towards diversity, equity, and inclusion there. So before we move on to our break, I would like to remind everyone that you can view today's agenda on presenters' bios and the 22 LEP cohort projects on the LEP web courses. You can sign in through webcourses.ucf.edu and take a look there. There's many our projects that we had that we spent time and energy on. So take a look at those as well. Lastly, please remember to be eligible for the 2022-23 UCF parking pass. I know it's a hot commodity around these parts here. You will need to attend at least one session and complete the confirmation quiz within web courses. So, make sure you go to the web courses, check out our presentations, do the confirmation quiz. It's just to say whether you were here or not and go from there. If you need technical assistance, accessing a session or have other questions, the Zoom help desk link is listed at the bottom of the agenda, and it's also will be posted in the chats throughout the time. And again, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great institute.